All right, let's go ahead and get started with the event. Thank you to everyone for joining us. My name is Bree Hogan. I'm the sales manager of Powell City of Books here in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I wanted to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many upcoming events we're looking forward to is Jen Lewis in conversation with Justin Chappell about her new book, The Chicken Soup Manifesto, which is this Sunday. You can always follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn more about Powell's books and other upcoming events. But tonight we are honored to welcome Sandor Ellix Katz to discuss his new book, Fermentation as Metaphor. Sandor is in conversation with Liz Crain tonight. Sandor's a self-taught experimentalist who lives in rural Tennessee. He is the author of two best-selling books, Wild Fermentation and The Art of Fermentation. Through hundreds of fermentation workshops he has taught around the world, he has helped catalyze a broad revival of the fermentation arts. His work has appeared on NPR's Fresh Air with Terry Gross, The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Guardian, PBS, Washington Post, and The Financial Times, along with numerous other media publications. In his first new book in 8 years, Fermentation as Metaphor, stemming from his personal obsession with all things fermented, Katz meditates on his art and work, drawing connections between microbial communities and aspects of human culture, such as politics, religion, social and cultural movements, art, music, sexuality, identity, many, many things, as well as our individual thoughts and feelings. He informs his arguments with his vast knowledge of the fermentation process, which he describes as a slow, gentle, steady, yet unstoppable force for change. Tonight, Katz is joined in conversation with Liz Crain. We were pleased to welcome Liz earlier this week in celebration of her new cookbook, Dumplings Equal Love. She's a longtime writer on Pacific Northwest food and drink, and she's also co-organizer of the annual Portland Fermentation Festival. This evening, we'll start with a conversation between Liz and Sandor, and then towards the end of the hour, we will have time for a question and answer period. So if you have a question for either Sandor or Liz, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can type your questions into that field. You can always support Sandor and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his new book from us. I will post a link to that in the chat tonight. And we do have a small amount of book plates that we'll include with the books that are purchased through us tonight. So again, that's over at powells.com. Liz and Sandor, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to host you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brink. Hi, Sandor.
Hi, Liz. So good to be in our kitchens together.
I know, it's kind of fun. I love it. And I wore my bacteria shirt for you.
Oh,
I
nice.
got this last week. I got my hair done for the first time in months. And where I go, it's a Teal Flamingo. They have thrift store in it. So I was like, that's my Sandor Katz shirt because it just fits in with the whole theme.
All right. Well, that's great. I'm just wearing a shirt that's covered with bacteria.
Well, we're all covered in it, as we learn in the book. Congratulations on this being out in the world. It's so exciting.
Well, sweet. Thank you very much. It's very exciting.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy so that I could read it before the event, and I read it in 2 sittings. And I love that
it's a short enough book for that.
But I love that it's the interlocked kind of short essays are very like conversational. So I feel like although I read it in 2 sittings, I'm going to come back to it again and again because, well, the beautiful photography, but it's also just really powerful and empowering. And so thank you for another amazing book that you've put into the world. So grateful for it.
Okay.
And I just want to,
it's my pleasure.
I have all of your other books here. They all have special places in my home. My very first edition, and it's got, oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. But I just do really quickly just want to say this book has had the most positive impact of any book on my life. It just opened up so many adventures for me, for starting the fermentation festival to just doing all kinds of home ferments and
it looks well worn. That's
it's very well worn.
I mean, for the author of a cookbook, there is no greater form of compliment than having the book look stained and worn and like it's been through some kitchen experiences with you.
Yeah, and they all have. And even the ones that don't have recipes, they come in and out of my kitchen because they're so relatable. So I just wanted to just really quickly say, if you wanted to, just welcome to everyone who is here for this event. I know that there are lots of virtual events, and I know that so many of you are Sandor devotees and just feel this great kinship to him through his workshops and through all of these books and just his kindness and his welcoming nature. So I just want to welcome you, and like, let's all pretend that we're all together and make this a just really warm and fun event, because we can't be together, but maybe this is propped up in your kitchen or in your living room, or so I just wanted to say that. But I think, like, Sandor, I would love it if you wouldn't mind, like, just kind of telling everyone. I mean, I think a lot of folks have probably just gotten their copies, but can you just talk about what fermentation is metaphor? What is this book?
Well, sure. So, I mean, this book is really, a departure from, my other books about fermentation, which are just very, kind of practical oriented, how to make sauerkraut, how to make kimchi, how to make yogurt, it's just, how to ferment everything. And it's very, practical information about that. And of course, interspersed throughout are, my ideas about fermentation. And I've certainly made note in the earlier books about, ways in which we use the word fermentation as a metaphor. And I would say, when I first started to get obsessed with all things fermented, which would be about 1993, I just started noticing, I read a lot. I read a lot of, I'm a little bit of a news junkie. I read a lot of magazine articles. But anyway, just in my reading, I would take note of ways in which, the word fermentation was used in a metaphorical way. It might be like an obituary for someone who, said that they had been part of a big sort of, artistic fermentation, that was occurring, in their young adult time, or, some time where there was a, like a lot of like musical inspiration, but they would express it as it was a place of great, musical fermentation. And, certainly people talking about it in terms of, politics and social change in terms of fermentation. So I just took note of this, that the word gets used in the English language frequently in these metaphorical ways. And what we mean when we say, a particular time or place where, there was great political ferment or musical ferment or artistic ferment or spiritual ferment or whatever, it means like things got bubbly. There was a lot of, change was in the air. There was innovation, there was receptivity to innovation, maybe, different innovations bouncing off of each other to create, meaningful changes. But it really gets to the etymology of the word. And I don't think this works in every language. I mean, I know it doesn't work in every language, but our English word for fermentation comes from the Latin fervere, which means to boil. And it's because the visible action of fermentation in liquids is bubbles, just like the visible action of boiling in liquids is bubbles. So, fermentation has always been sort of recognized by the bubbles that creates and, conceptualized as a sort of like cold boiling. And so, when other things, in the social sphere get bubbly because people are getting excited for whatever reason, that can be expressed as fermentation as well. So, you know, in the English language, it happens that built into the word is a very expansive metaphor that can be applied to, you know, to almost everything. And so, you know, this is something I've been thinking about. This is something I've been remarking on, you know, in a lot of my public speaking. But, you know, I've sort of had it in my head that it's something that I'd like to explore more deeply. And anyway, this you know, this book is the outcome of that, you know, which is just me, you know, kind of reflecting on, you know, some of the implications of fermentation as a metaphor. And then, I mean, what I also did is I took some of the, you know, what I would say are misconceptions that people often bring into fermentation with them, which is, you know, notions of, you know, purity and contamination. So, I mean, I can't imagine how many times I've been asked, you know, when people have watched me, you know, shred a cabbage and stuff it into a jar, and then they're scandalized that I didn't use some chemicals to sterilize the jar first. And they're like, you know, don't you need to sterilize the jar? How can this work? Like, what if the jar is contaminated? And so, you know, built into the, you know, anxiety that people have about fermentation because of the war on bacteria, we've been taught to be so fearful of bacteria and other microorganisms. You know, people have this concept of purity, which, I mean, in my, you know, in my mind is a myth. I mean, purity is something we could aspire to, but just nothing is pure, you know, in the world. Nothing is pure. And so, you know, when you start with an empty vessel, it is not a blank slate. It's, you know, it's got some, you know, random organisms on the surface. And of course, there's all kinds of chemicals you can buy that would like briefly kill all those organisms and turn it into a blank slate. And then you would rinse it with your water that isn't isn't sterilized. You'd put it in your drying rack, and your air that's not sterile would be circulating around it. You'd be touching it with your grimy hands, which are never sterile. And you know, and so like there's just inevitably some microorganisms on the vessel already. And then in turn, and so, you know, contamination already has happened, and purity is something that we can never reach. So, you know, in the book, I'm also dealing with, you know, like addressing these concepts of purity and contamination, which I consider to be, you know, very closely related to fermentation, at least in terms of, you know, how people conceptualize it and the kinds of questions that people have. And then, of course, the one other element in this book is microscopy. And so I decided, rather than just having sort of like a, you know, just my words on the pages, I've been doing all this. You know, for years I've been playing with microscopes and taking pictures of foods, and also sort of frustrated with the limitations of my own setup. I was able to access a scanning electron microscope at a nearby university, and you know, and with, you know, much help from, you know, the woman who runs the microscope. I mean, I showed up in her office with like 40 food samples, and then, you know, she converted them into, you know, totally dried samples that we could look at under the scanning electron microscope. And that was super exciting. Oh yeah, those are great ones. And, you know, at some point, if things get a little slow here, I can experiment with my backgrounds here. I'm gonna put some miso in the background.
Things are not gonna get slow with you, Sandor. Things are just gonna get
we'll
more
spend a little time
bubbly.
with me in a background with miso. Rather than and a more awkward haircut. So anyway, I
love that.
And then these, you know, you can see the long green ones are, you know, classic lactic acid bacteria, rod bacteria, shape.
And you colorized a lot of these in such a cool way. I love, it's just like such a vibrant
Well, one thing I learned from this process is that, well, when I work with my home microscope, I'm using light, and so things have their colors. But
Yeah.
once you remove light from the equation, there is no color. So with a scanning electron microscope, with all that amazing magnification and resolution that you get, what you lose is color. And so you end up with these black and white images. And I wish I could tell you that I had the skills to colorize these myself, but I don't. So, basically, it was graphic designers who, sort of took the black and white images and colorized them.
Well, they're beautiful. I figured out with this bacteria shirt, it's most like the dosa bacteria. Okay. The kind of oblong. So that's the one that I felt the most. And I loved that I got to do a bunch of, you've been doing so many, you travel so much doing workshops, but of course now you are not doing that.
Not in the last 7 months.
Right. And so you've done so many of these virtual fermentation fests that have been wonderful. I got to go, you did a dosa workshop at the British Ferment Symposium or one of these, and then you made I call them sandy cakes, the savory sourdough pancakes that you have in wild fermentation. You made those at the Florida Fermentation Festival. So I just wanted to, I think that everyone here is just a solid gold 100% Sandor fan, but if you're not already following him on social media, all of these festivals that he's been doing are just, and events and speaking. You're doing one coming up tomorrow, right?
One tomorrow. I mean, tomorrow I'm doing one that's part of this amazing event that involves people on several continents that's called Ferment for Food Justice. And the whole thing is a fundraiser for a few food justice organizations. And tomorrow I'll be doing an interview, really mostly about my new book, Fermentation as Metaphor, but it's kind of part of this event. But then there's also lots of, practical presentations with people in different places sharing fermentation skills. And I think it's so amazing that during this time when so many people have been stuck at home and not able to go out to large events, and at the same time so many people with time at home have really been getting interested in fermentation, that people have been organizing sort of so many great Skillshare events. And and definitely this fermentation revival is ascendant, and more and more people are getting interested in this, and also more and more people are developing some kind of expertise that they're ready to share with someone. So there's a lot of excellent teachers around, and more and more ferments that might in the past have been considered to be obscure, getting some getting some attention that they're due.
And I love that you have one of the most amazing kitchens I've ever gotten to be in, which you're in right now, but it's enormous.
Well, a little cluttered as a background, but what can you
That's
do?
the beauty of it, though. I remember when I was there, there's just so many ferments and things drying from the garden, and all of your jars back there. And that's a good segue. So the last time I feel like I see you all the time because I've been attending, such a fan. I've been attending all of your events, but the last time I got to see you was in 2017 when I got to come out. I was lucky enough and interview you for the Believer magazine. And at that point, you were talking about in the interview, a few days that I interviewed you, about, I think, I do travel so much and I'm doing all these workshops internationally, but I'm really, really gonna try to take time off in 2018. I have this idea for this book that has to do with metaphor and fermentation and purity and contamination and all of these themes. And then now it's here. So I just wonder, what was the process like? What was it like taking that hiatus and putting this book together? Did you actually take a hiatus? You were doing all kinds of stuff?
Well, I mean, I did. I mean, I took,
Yeah.
you know, most of 2018 off from traveling.
Yeah.
So let's say the first half of 2018, I didn't go anywhere. I just stayed at home. And that was lovely. And I did a bunch of projects that really weren't about writing this book. I mean, I thought about this book, but I did not,
Yeah.
I did not really like sit down and write it then. You know, maybe there was like one morning where I sat down and made an outline or something like that, but I didn't really substantively get into it. I did some like home improvement projects. I did a bunch of gardening.
Yeah.
You know, I did a larger than typical number of workshops at home that year that I hosted. Yeah. One of them was building a pizza oven, an outdoor cob oven. So, next time you visit, we'll make some pizza.
Yeah.
And then the second half of that year, I did do some traveling. I mean, I actually did a workshop tour in Southeast Alaska, which was amazing. And, you know, I had been planning that for 2 years. I got invited at the last minute by the Slow Food Organization to come to Terra Madre in Italy, which is a big international slow food event. And here's the thing is that Slow Food has translated my books into Italian. And so, you know, they invited me there to promote my book. And then they also plugged me into some of the, you know, programming for Terra Madre. So that was super fun to get to participate in that way. And, you know, just because of all the traveling I do around the world, I mean, I ran into people at Terra Madre that I know from Japan, from Ecuador, from the US, from Mexico. So, you know, it was just a tremendous like kind of networking event for me. But, you know, mostly in that year, I took the year off, and it was a really nice break from travel. But then I, you know, threw myself into it in 2019. You know, well, all the periods when I've like taken a break from traveling, you know, I've ended up sort of accumulating so many invitations that once it starts again, I'm traveling sort of more than ever before. But I will say one of my reflections of this period of not traveling is that like I do not want to pick up the pace that I had going. This summer, I kept on. You know, Google Photos kept reminding me of like, oh, on this day last year, you were here. So, you know, every couple of days I'd get a reminder of like just how fast paced my life was last summer, like how many trips I made and how many times I was just home for like 4 or 5 days to like do my laundry and pack again and leave again. And, you know, I don't want to continue traveling at that rate. Like I love traveling. I love meeting people. I love sharing about fermentation. I love learning about fermentation. But you know, just that pace is very much unsustainable. So for me, it's been a real gift to sort of be forced to slow down.
Now you're just like, I'm traveling to this part of my kitchen for this workshop, and I'm traveling to get your kitchen's large enough.
I go outside every day. I go outside every day because my outhouse is outside, so I need to go outside for certain personal reasons every day, and also my garden. And really, this year I've had just the nicest garden I've ever had because I have been here to take care of it, and I haven't been, you know, disappearing for 2 weeks and then back for 2 days. And so anyway, that's been another silver lining of this.
That's great. So here's another question. So I feel like most book projects, I'm sure that all of these, there's certain elements of surprise. So you have this idea of the book, you know, like we were talking about it, for thinking about it, having like what the imagery is going to be, but then along the way, when you're starting to put it together, what kind of new surprising directions did it take you in terms of research or writing?
Well, I mean, it was just very different. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, writing about how to make food is a very, like, for me, has become a very straightforward way of writing. So, you know, I have
Right.
this list of topics, and then like, okay, the next one is Dobanjang. Okay, how am I going to break down Dobanjang? And, you know, it's like you're writing about something that is very, very concrete and specific. And then there's a sequence of actions, and it's just about describing them clearly, you know, in the order in which they need to be done. You know, writing about something as abstract as, you know, metaphor, it's just it lacks that kind of concreteness. So, I mean, for me personally, as a writing process, it was much more of a struggle than, you know, sort of my books that are about, you know, how to make this and how to make that, and, you know, A, B, C, D, just have been much more straightforward, as a project. And really, I think in the beginning, just because, you know, my books have been these like instructional kinds of things, you know, every topic that I began with on my outline, I had conceptualized as a chapter. And what I realized as I was writing is like, well, a lot of these are, you know, they're ideas that I have, like, you know, you know, several paragraphs of you know, things to say about it, but, you know, not necessarily like a chapter in the way that, you know, a chapter in the Art of Fermentation or Wild Fermentation is. So, you know,
Yeah.
part of it was just making my peace with writing, you know, a shorter kind of a work that's, and it's about, you know, things that are much more abstract, and, you know, how to write about them in, you know, how to write about, you know, let's say, you know, political struggles in ways that, you know, will be interesting to people who aren't necessarily from the same, you know, in the same country with the same issues. So, you know, how to not get sort of, you know, too focused on, you know, very, you know, U.S. specific kinds of issues. You know, how to retain, you know, sort of a, you know, broad interest.
Can I just, in this, speaking of that in particular, there's a section, can I read just like 2 sentences and then ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Because I love this.
Someone else reads my book to me.
Oh yeah. Well, it's at the end of this section that's titled Purity and Contamination as Political Weapons. It's the very end of that, and it's bacteria and fungi and the broader microbial communities in which they exist and exemplify adaptability and constant change. And fermentation offers potent metaphors for imagining change and communicating about it so that we may take collective action. So like you were talking about, people are, you know, fermentation is on this sort of ascent, and people are becoming they've always been interested in it, but more interested in it, but also like all of the social goings on around the country right now, like in terms of Black Lives Matter activism, and like how is that playing into fermentation as metaphor?
Well, I mean, I would just say that, I mean, it's not like I think that the leadership of Black Lives Matter is, you know, sort of thinking about fermentation or necessarily, you know, inspired by fermentation. I think it's that, you know, as I was talking about the word, like when people get bubbly, when a lot of people become vocal, you know, that, you know, like, this is a problem, we have to confront this problem, and you know, we need more people to join us in confronting this problem, and you know, and it becomes like a bigger movement, and you get these, like, you know, conversations happening in, you know, cities and towns everywhere. And by the way, not only in the United States, like, you know, is this a historical figure who we should still be celebrating? You know, or do we need to, you know, really critique things that this historical figure did, and maybe they're not someone that we want to continue sort of referring to as a role model? And, you know, I mean, I think that, you know, all of these conversations happening, you know, is definitely an example of social fermentation. And I think that, you know, in our lives, there are all kinds of, you know, sort of big foundational, you know, problems that we have failed to address. And I would say, you know, in the United States and beyond the United States, you know, race is one of them. And so, you know, I think, you know, social movements that are sort of like, you know, confronting this, you know, kind of like, you know, foundational problem that we have are, you know, are really important. And certainly, you know, would serve as an example of what I'm talking about as social fermentation. And I would say that, you know, confronting climate change is another example of this. You know, and I think, I mean, unfortunately, not only, you know, sort of movements that I would identify with and support, you know, necessarily are, you know, are not the only, you know, kinds of, you know, bubbly excitement that you know, can be viewed as fermentation. And, you know, I would also say that the, you know, the resurgence of white supremacy and you know, all of these sort of like, you know, armed groups asserting white supremacy. I mean, one could also, you know, describe those as a form of social fermentation. So it's not as if like, you know, the metaphorical ferment only you know, sort of occurs in ways that, you know, we like, you know, I mean, you know, bubbliness and people getting excited about ideas can, you know, can lead to, you know, really improved outcomes, but, you know, it's also possible for it to, you know, like result in terrible things.
And I know, like, you already talked about the photos in the book, but can you just talk a bit more? Because I feel like it's such an important part. Like, to me, of all of your books, I mean, there is artwork, like there are illustrations and then photos in Wild Fermentation, both editions, but it's the most like, this is going to probably live for the most part in my living room because it is like very coffee table. Like, I want to pick it up and look at it, all of the colors. And then I love that, you know, you can refer to the back and see like what, you know, like the dosa bacteria and then the simmering.
Yeah, so that was a decision we made along the way, was rather than treating the photos as like illustrating something where there'd be a caption right there saying what it was, you know, we wanted them more just to be sort of like beautiful, provocative, you know, interesting art. And then at the back, there's a page that describes, you know, what each image is actually of.
And I think, like, I'm just going to ask this, we're not like quite, we have like 5 minutes till we do Q&A, but this one just does relate to it. I just wanted to look really quickly. Are the colors and the colorized photos, are they based on real colors? They're so beautiful.
Not necessarily. No, we were playing around with color.
Yeah.
So no, the colors and the colorized ones are not necessarily, you know, trying to reproduce the true colors.
So one of the, oh, sorry.
But not all of the photos are colorized. Like, you know, a lot of the ones, I mean, I mean, in the at the page at the end that describes what they are of, it also says which ones I took with my home setup. But all the ones that I took with my home setup, those are the, you know, the natural colors.
Yeah. And I just want to ask, so one of my favorites.
I want to just say that I'm so glad that you find the images so compelling, and just say, so do I. And, you know, this has been part of my, part of my obsession with fermentation has been, sort of, for the last like almost 10 years, I've had a microscope in my kitchen so that I could like look at things that, that I was making under the microscope and just, get a sense of what they look like.
Like this one, you see so much in it. There's so much going on there.
Yeah.
One of my favorite sections, it's very relatable to me at the moment, is the emotional composting. Will you just talk a little bit about what that is? It's one of the sections of the book that, just spoke to me.
Yeah, sure. So, emotional composting is a phrase that I got from a good friend of mine, Valencia. And then when I asked her about it, it turned out she didn't even make up that expression. She got it reading, I say their name in there, but I'm just blanking on it, but a Taoist spiritual writer, Mantak Chia. But, composting, of course, is a form of fermentation. And, microorganisms are taking your kitchen scraps and the weeds from your garden and whatever else, and then just reducing those, into humus, which is, basically the basis of soil fertility. And that's really an important process for renewing life, taking, dead plant matter. You can also add manure to it. You could add animal products to it, and it all gets broken down. So I just think it's a powerful idea for conceptualizing our emotions and what to do with them. So, when you're dealing with like rage or self-doubt or self-esteem issues, I think just the image of compost, that like, okay, obviously you can't like deny your emotions, you can't reject your emotions, but it's like, it's a process, it's an organic process that enables us to turn them into something else. So just as any other fermentation process is a renewing process that breaks down old forms and gives rise to new forms. I think that as a visualization, as an idea for how to process our emotions, composting is a very, very, powerful idea, and it's always resonated for me, and it seemed very in line with the rest of this book, so I included it.
I have a lot of emotional compost in the bin over there that I need to. It's been a hard time. It's like we have so. I got the pitchfork. I'm gonna keep turning that into good stuff.
Hey, before we get to other people's questions, I just want to, because I don't know when it was, a year and a half ago, you were writing to me about doubanjiang, or maybe you were just writing on Facebook, and I saw that you were trying to find guidance for making doubanjiang. And I just want to show you. So first of all, this is a mature batch. This is so for those of you who don't know, doubanjiang is this Sichuanese fermented condiment that is fermented from fava beans and chilies and salt. There's a couple of other ingredients, but it's primarily fava beans and chilies. And this is the batch that I made in 2017. Now is residing in my refrigerator, and I've been using it and stir fries and other things. This is the 2019 batch that you can
made so many.
Still has some red color. And then 2020, I'm getting more ambitious. Okay, these are the favas. Yeah. So these are the favas in a brine. Yeah. And then, this is the bright red, fresh chilies. So they ferment separately for like 3 months, and then around the new year, I will combine them and ferment them together, and then start putting them out on sunny days so they can dehydrate a little bit and stirring them. but it's like a really wonderful ferment. And in the new book that I have been working on during the lockdown period, which is a fermentation travelogue book,
I'm excited.
Title to be determined, but I definitely have a doubanjiang recipe in there.
It's so exciting.
So, so hopefully a year from now we can have a date, maybe in person at Powell's if things work out. Maybe it'll be in our kitchens again when we're debuting that book.
Yeah, really quickly, I'll show you mine. So I did, it was more than just like social media. I actually you don't remember because you're so busy with so many things, but you gave me a lot of really helpful advice. And this is my first batch. It's my year and a half.
You went big. You went big.
I went big. I did 3 gallons. And then I scoop off little bits, and put it in the fridge. But I just wanted to mention that what was really helpful for me with that was all of your advice, and also your program that you did with Mara King. If you all
okay, so that's my videos. And so for anyone who hasn't seen them, my friend Mara King, who is a chef and fermenter based in Boulder, Colorado, but she grew up in Hong Kong, and she took me with her mother, who lives in Hong Kong and has spent a lot of time traveling in China. We went and we traveled in Southwest China to learn about fermentation. And then we also brought along this wonderful Italian videographer who speaks Chinese, Mattia Sottobocco, and he documented the whole thing and then produced 8 roughly 10-minute videos. They're all available on YouTube for free. It's called People's Republic of Fermentation. And one of the 8 episodes is about doubanjiang. But then, they're all about, fermenting vegetables or making rice alcohol. Each one has a different fermentation theme. So anyone who's interested in fermentation will enjoy these. People's Republic of Fermentation. If you just search that, you'll find it. It's my YouTube channel is Sandor Kraut. That's what I am on Instagram also. And I list all my websites on my website, which is wildfermentation.com.
Yeah, those shows are so informative. I love them. So I'm going to get to the questions because we have quite a lot, and I want to get started. So it says, "Hi Sandor and Liz, Gretchen Westlight here. So lovely to see you both again." So I'm going to kind of paraphrase as it's a bit long. Hi Gretchen. Sandor, I remember
Try on Community Farm.
Yes, that's what
I remember workshops there. Yeah.
So so she's talking about that workshop that you did 10 plus years ago there at Tryon, and then you defined this refrigeration bubble as the limited time in human history where we have to come to depend on electric powered cooling to preserve or extend the life of food. We're not out of that bubble yet, but it seems like it's drawing closer, she says, as collectively we become more aware. Hidden costs of refrigeration, climate warming, economic disparities. Do you touch on this, she wonders, in the new book, or would you be willing to expand on that here? Seems like it fits in nicely.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think I focus on it at any length in the book. I mean, I might reference it in passing, but it's certainly something that I've talked about and thought about. And if we just went a little bit further in my refrigerator, my kitchen, we'd see I do have a refrigerator. It's not like I'm living a refrigerator-free life at all. But I mean, I definitely think that that is among the reasons why it's so important that we sort of maintain this kind of cultural wisdom that's been generated all around the world of how to feed ourselves without refrigeration, because for most people who have been raised with refrigeration, it is inconceivable how a person could live their life without refrigeration. And our food system right now is so built around refrigeration. And refrigeration is convenient. Refrigeration makes a lot of things easier, but obviously refrigeration is only it's about 100 years old. And, there's probably people who are listening here today whose, grandparents or great-grandparents like grew up without refrigeration. And of course, if we look at it, in a global way, most households in planet Earth in 2020 do not have a refrigerator. It is still something that, in many parts of the world, only the wealthiest people have access to refrigeration. And in some parts of the world, electricity is just not steady enough, for refrigeration to be a reliable way of making sure that our food is preserved. So, fermentation is certainly not the only way that people have preserved food in the absence of refrigeration. I mean, drying, smoking, salting, and many processes involve more than one of these methods of preservation. But I think that as Gretchen implied in the question, what if suddenly the cost of energy spiked and it costs 4 times as much to have electricity? Like, not everybody would be able to keep using their refrigerator. And, sort of, what if there's some big crisis? What if the if the, sources of fuel start running out? We're just not going to be able to maintain the level of electricity we've had. I mean, who knows what the scenario is? I'm not voluntarily giving up my refrigerator because it's such a, it's such a practical tool. But I think that this is part of the logic of why it's so important to, preserve all of this fermentation wisdom, because, our ancestors figured out how to, how to sustain themselves without the benefit of this tool. And if we lost this tool, we would still be able to sustain ourselves. But not if we sort of lose all of the, wisdom about food preservation.
All of my neighbors can come for Dobonjong in that situation. Did you grow up calling it the icebox by any chance? Your refrigerator?
No, we always called it the refrigerator, but my grandmother always called it the icebox.
That's what,
because she remembered, yeah.
It's a true icebox. Okay, so I have a question here from Anna Gabarski. Hi, Sandor. Thank you for this super interesting talk and for your books. I'm a graduate student studying social theories of subjectivity and abjection. And the idea of fermentation as metaphor is really making me think about my own work. I'm wondering about your opinion, though. Would you say that fermentation is a process that transforms bad bacteria into good bacteria? Or is the bacteria that undergoes fermentation never bad to begin with? Thank you so much. That's
well, okay. First of all, I would say that it's really not the bacteria that undergoes fermentation. It is the substrate, the nutrient that you're feeding to the bacteria is what's being transformed. So, here I'm just gonna, because I like having,
yeah.
I like having show and tell items. So in this, it's not the bacteria that are being transformed by the fermentation, it's the nutrients. Now, as bacteria consume carbohydrates and metabolize them into lactic acid, it changes the environment, and that does have implications for the composition of the bacterial community. So the bacterial community does change, but that's not what the primary process is. The primary process is bacteria consuming nutrients on the vegetables and transforming the environment or transforming the vegetables themselves. Now, in terms of good and bad, I mean, I really stay away from, projecting values like good or bad onto bacteria. I mean, I think it would be absurd to describe fermentation as a process of, transforming bad bacteria into good bacteria. Now, it certainly has the effect, like if some of the cabbage in here, did have cells of salmonella or Clostridium botulinum or other, organisms that could potentially make us sick, as luck would have it, they can't survive in an acidic environment. So as the lactic acid bacteria, which always dominate every single time, and they're always there on the vegetables, but as they produce lactic acid, it narrows the range of what organisms could grow. I would call it like it's a factor in creating a selective environment. And so effectively what that means is that the bacteria that we would describe as pathogens are destroyed by the acidity. They just can't survive in that high acidity. But so no, I wouldn't describe fermentation as a process of transforming bad bacteria into good bacteria. And I would just say that, I don't think that there are bad bacteria versus good bacteria. I don't think that there are bad viruses versus good viruses. I don't think that there are bad insects and good insects. I don't think that there are bad people and good people. I just think that there are things I don't like about lots of insects. There are things I don't like about lots of people. There's things I don't like about certain bacteria. There's things I don't like about certain viruses. But, who am I to say that like another creature produced by evolution is bad? And I think that there's some very interesting examples of science or medicine deciding that some bacteria is bad because it's been correlated with some health issue, and then then there's drugs which make it nearly extinct before the researchers start to realize, like, oh, okay, well, maybe this organism that was part of everybody's microbiome actually played some role that we didn't recognize. And so, maybe one of the emerging, health issues that we're seeing has to do with, our efforts to eradicate this bacteria that we had, assigned the value bad. Just maybe it was because we didn't recognize that it also did something important. So I would just say at this stage of the game, we do not know enough about bacteria to be assigning values like good or bad to them. Yes, the bacterial community evolves, in response to the shifting environment and the shifting nutrients, but it's not like all fermentation is taking what's bad and turning it into what's good. It's a mixed bag.
And I love for all of you, when you get your copy of the book, there's a really, like, one of my favorite sections is on clean food versus dirty food. And you kind of go into the same kind of that they're like, essentially, like, what does that mean? It means different things to different people, but you can look forward to that section. That's in the 60s section of the book. So I think we have time for 2 more questions. So I'm just gonna, because I don't like to choose because there are a few, I'll just start with the first. How did your obsession with fermentation change how you live your daily life, Sandor? And that's from Ellen Beeler.
Well, I'm going to spend a lot of time fermenting, but I guess what I want to do is broaden the context a little bit and say, I got interested in fermentation as an outgrowth of getting interested in gardening and producing food. And, I knew I liked flavors of fermentation. I knew a little bit about, the probiotic concept. But, what really got me fermenting was getting involved in gardening and seeing, like, oh my God, what are we going to do with all of these cabbages that are ready at the same time? Oh, I should learn how to make sauerkraut. I looked at the joy of cooking. I learned how to make sauerkraut. And then I've learned how to make lots of other foods. But really, my home life is largely driven by you know, like seasonal abundance. So, I mean, I'll show you,
Yeah.
I just because I've covered my kitchen island with potential show and tell items.
Oh,
But,
cool.
okay.
Yes. We
So
want to see all of them.
these
Yeah.
are chestnuts, okay? So outside of my, this is a gallon-sized jar filled with dried chestnuts. So outside of my house, there are 3 chestnut trees, and you know, all of September and into the beginning of October, every day we were going out and picking up chestnuts and eating some of them fresh, chestnuts roasting over an open fire, you know, fresh chestnuts steamed, so wonderful. But the problem is that if you don't use them right away, they're our chestnuts. There's some little worm that lays an egg in the flour, and so the chestnuts drop with this little embryonic worm in it. And that worm will eat through the chestnut and then and then live its life. So the first thing we do with the ones we're not going to use that day is we put them in the freezer, and this kills the embryo of the worm. And then we cut them open, dry them first on the porch with a fan blowing on them. Then we put them in the dehydrator. Then we grind them up. And here, this is chestnut crumbles, and this is chestnut flour. So I grind them and then I sift them. And so the flour is what makes it through the sifter, and the crumbles are what doesn't. Now I've also made chestnut koji. And I have a batch of chestnut miso.
Chestnut?
Actually, my computer is sitting on my chestnut miso. But then this is chestnut shio-koji. So this is like a, you know, a half a gallon of chestnut shio-koji. So shio-koji, for anyone who doesn't know, that's just Japanese for salt koji. And, you know, the way I do this is I mix koji with the same weight of water. So, you know, for a pound of koji, I'd use a pound of water. It all works much better in metric because a liter of water weighs a kilogram. And then based on the combined weight, I typically use 5% salt. So, and then I put those all together. I put them in the blender, blend it into a little paste, and then I leave it out for about 10 days. More than 10 days past this time, but usually 10 days is what I'm aiming for. And then I refrigerate it, and then I just use it as a marinade. I might like, you know, I marinate tempeh in shio-koji, so good. You know, any kind of meat or fish is wonderful with it. You know, vegetables that have like a, you know, a more neutral kind of a flavor do great with shio-koji marinade. So chestnuts. But anyway, the question is how. So the bigger question was like, how has my obsession with fermentation changed my life? Well, I mean, certainly it's given me lots of different things to do with the bounty of the harvest. So, you know, so that's one thing. But I mean, in my particular case, it just sort of like it just sort of gave, you know, it ended up like becoming this whole, you know, career and life path for me. You know, fermentation, you know, has really like commanded my attention for, you know, 27 years now. And, you know, the first few years it was just, you know, because it was interesting and it was fun to make things and share them with people. And, you know, then I got involved in doing a little bit of teaching, you know, once a year. Then I was missing that event one year. So I wrote a little zine with my recipes and self-published 50 copies of it. But the process of doing that made me realize like, oh, there's a lot, I have a lot to say about this. And there's a lot to be said and there's a lot to be learned. And so I decided to try to write a book, and I wrote Wild Fermentation. But then, you know, what started as a book tour to promote Wild Fermentation has not stopped, you know, and that was 17 years ago. And, you know, until COVID, I mean, I just kept on getting invitations to come and speak about fermentation. There's so much interest in fermentation. I would say it's an aspect of culture that got really suppressed in the 20th century, just because of the war on bacteria. And it's not that people stopped eating or drinking products of fermentation, because obviously, you know, the major products of fermentation have enjoyed enduring popularity. And, you know, sort of bread, wine, beer, cheese, vinegar, you know, these were as prominent in the times of all of our great grandparents and their great grandparents as they are in our lives. It's just that you know, in most of the 20th century, people just forgot about how all of food was produced. And, you know, oh, food comes from the supermarket. Oh, before that, it comes from a factory. And, you know, the actual processes by which food is created, you know, were so de-emphasized that, you know, like, you know, I mean, on my first book tour, I just remember so clearly, like, it's just so many people, generally people older than me, who were like, I've always been interested in these foods, and there's been so little information about them. It's been so obscure. So I think that, you know, the interest in fermentation was really, you know, it was really already brewing. But, you know, I mean, it's been a great gift in my life to be able to sort of tap into this, you know, interest that so many people have had, and, you know, and to be able to share information in a way that has, you know, sort of enriched and empowered so many people.
We're so lucky that we get you. Okay, this is the last question, Sandor. I like to end on this one. So this is from James Casey. As one who has overseen a number of failed ferments, what can be gleaned metaphorically from those failures?
Well, I mean, you know, if you're going to experiment, you're going to have failures. And so, yeah, you know, I would say if you're not having some failures, then you're not going outside of your comfort zone very much. No. So I don't know. I mean, I'm always encouraging people to sort of like do your experimental batches at a small scale. So you're not going to feel terrible if you have a failure. And you're not going to like waste a lot of material and a lot of time and a lot of money. You know, but it's inevitable. And I think that, you know, in wild fermentation, I quoted a friend of mine who I built a house with. And his mantra that he would repeat every time we realized we had done something wrong was, our perfection lies in our imperfections. And, you know, I think, you know, if you're going to get experimental with fermentation, you can create some incredible things. You can probably create some unprecedented things, but you'll probably also have some failures along the way. And, you know, you might as well just, you know, accept that, and, you know, and try to bring your analytic skills to bear on your failures, and, you know, figure out what was it that went wrong. Actually, this morning started with, you know, when I woke up, I already had a text from my brother who had a yogurt failure. But you know, I would just by talking with him, you know, and hearing the full story of what happened, I was able to like help him figure out what went wrong, how to salvage that milk into some cheese, and what to do differently next time. So I think that, you know, you have to accept failure. I mean, not only in fermentation, but just, you know, I mean, if you're going to live like a life where you try new things, and I would encourage, like, you know, everybody to do that. Like, sometimes those new things that you try are not going to work out the way you imagined them to be. And, you know, you have to accept that, you know, failure is not a terrible thing. Failure is an opportunity to, you know, learn something and do better the next time.
I would just like to say my grossest fermentation failure was cheese soda. It was so gross, but I love that I tried it, and I still would like to have a successful cheese soda at some point in my life.
Let me just briefly respond to this one question about information privilege. And I think that information privilege is real. And you know, I want to say that, you know, when I've been doing you know, research and trying to access you know, peer-reviewed articles and stuff, I have relied on the kindness of friends of mine who are university affiliated. who have been willing to share their, login information for, sort of big university libraries that have lots of subscriptions. But I think that, without that, there's a lot less information available to anybody. When I was working on my 2 books, I would go to the State University Library that's a half an hour from where I live and just sit in the library there. And by using their computers, I could gain the access. And then later on, I got like other people's login codes. But I think that that's a real issue. And, sort of with information as with everything, privilege exists, and people do not all have, equal levels of access. Okay, so now things will progress wherever they're going to progress. I guess we're at the end of our time.
I think we are, because I said that was the last question, and then we did that one. So and Bree's back, so we have another square on the screen.
Yes. I feel like we could definitely keep talking about fermentation.
I want to see the other things. I want to, all the stuff that's behind the computer. I want to see more. But
I definitely hear. I have the last,
like one more thing.
Yes, that's fine.
Of last November's fermented daikon radishes. So I started out with I have a 200-liter vessel, and now I'm down to under 2 liters of it. So 198 liters of this have been eaten, not all by me.
You share a lot of your ferments,
I do share a lot of my ferments.
And are you do you have things in the garden right now that you're?
One other thing. I'm going to show you one other thing. This has been a total revelation, and I saw that Heidi Nestler was one of the people who are on here. But this is a natto-based condiment. So when I was in China and in Burma, I saw natto-like ferments mixed with other spices and dehydrated. And so last year when Mara was visiting me, we were talking about this, and we were making some natto, and we decided to dehydrate some of it. And ever since then, I have been dehydrating natto, grinding it up with toasted sesame and other spices. Like this batch is with chilies and Sichuan peppercorns. I have another batch with coriander seeds. I have another batch with za'atar. But the base is dehydrated natto and toasted sesame seeds, and I've been grinding them up with different seasonings. And I mean, I've been putting this on everything. I've been putting this on like eggs in the morning, on popcorn, on almost anything that I eat in between. And it's just like been such a wonderful seasoning. In our kitchen, we've been calling this special sauce. I guess read it backwards to you all, or just to me?
Yeah, we can read it. We can read it. I just want to mention to all of you that are in the Portland area, Heidi Nestler is maker of Wanpaku natto. And it's so yummy. She's also a co-organizer with me and Claudia Lucero of the Portland Fermentation Festival. She wrote something, love it, working on that here. Yeah. So thank you for showing us those additional things. And thank you for coming back and joining us, Bree.
Yeah, it's been such a fun event. It's a bit like Sandor has a magical kitchen there, and could just keep sharing all of that with us all night. Sandor's new book is Fermentation as Metaphor. His previous books were Wild Fermentation and The Art of Fermentation. You can find a copy at powells.com. Liz's new cookbook is Dumplings Equal Love, which came out this month as well. All very lovely books, great picks for anyone, any fans of cooking.
I have one other book that actually Liz pointed out earlier, but this is published in 2006. The Revolution Will Not Be Microwaved: Inside America's Underground Food Movement. So this is currently in print and available.
Perfect. I did post some links in the chat tonight, so you have about 10 seconds to hop over there and click on those links, and you can go right to all of Sandor's books on powells.com. It's been a true pleasure to host both of you. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and we hope that you log in for another event in the future. Have a good night.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for hosting
Thank
us.
you,
I love
everyone.
Powell's.
Yes, it was lovely to
too.
meet
Good
you
night,
both.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye.